Hello and thanks for joining us for another Airbrush Asylum step-by-step video. In this step-by-step video we are going to show you how to airbrush this cassowary artwork. The video will be in 3 parts, so be sure to check them all out to learn how to complete the entire piece. I'm starting here with an old projector of ours and I'm utilizing it as a light box. If you don't have access to an overhead projector like this or even a proper light box, then you can utilize other methods to also do the same thing and simulate a light box. One of the easiest ways to do it is find a nice large window in your house, and during the day place your artwork reference up against that window, and providing there's enough light that's coming in, that will provide you that transparency that you're seeing here, and you'll be able to see through to the front of your piece, and you'll be able to draw on the back of the reference like I'm doing now, so that you can transfer all your lines. So essentially it's exactly the same sort of thing as using a light box. Alright, so try that out if you do not have access to either, like I said, an overhead projector or an actual light box. If you do want to buy a light box, most art supply shops or stationery shops should be able to help you. Overhead projectors are a little bit harder to find. You'll see there's a lot of digital ones available. I still use an overhead one, so you can find them at older shops like vintage shops, or even ask at your local school or universities. They may have some that they're getting rid of. Alright, so back to the artwork. You can see I've got a reference picture of this cassowary printed out just on normal A4 paper. It's just printed on regular paper, not photo paper, so that way it's a bit thinner and it makes it easier for the light to shine through. That way I can see through on the reverse here, and I can see exactly what lines I've got to trace. What I'm doing is using a 2B pencil. The reason I'm using a 2B pencil is because I want a heavier lead on there so that it makes it easier to transfer when we go to the next step to transfer our design onto our aluminium composite panel. Okay, so you can see I'm virtually just drawing over every single line here. Make sure I'm getting the entire design and I'm not missing anything. Any shadows and highlights or any bits of texture, I'm outlining and circling that entire area. You can see there, I'm tracing around that whole shadow there. The more information that you put in at this stage, the easier it's going to make it when you start working on your artwork, especially with something like this where we want to go for a bit more of a photorealistic end result. Then it's important to replicate as much of the detail as possible, even to the point of all the shadows. I mean, obviously the strokes of the fur and all that, if they vary a little bit, that's fine, but we pretty much want the majority of it as accurate as possible. Alright, so take your time with this step. It's not a rush. You want to take your time, get everything in there so that you've got as much information as possible. Remember, if there's too much, you can always leave bits out and that pencil line will eventually disappear. But if you don't have it there, then it makes it a lot harder to just freehand it afterwards. Okay, so we're almost finished with tracing over this entire reference here, and then once that's done, you'll see we'll flip it back the other way, and then I'll transfer it onto the composite panel that we're working on. Now for this particular video, I've done this artwork on a composite panel. You can also try this on canvas, which if you are going to do it on something like that, or a t-shirt or something that's not a hard surface, then this transfer technique may be a bit more difficult, so then you might just want to project it as you would normally do. But you can also, do this on any sort of paper or even automotive application, which is pretty much the same as using a composite panel. So have a play around with it. The paints that we're going to be using are water-based paints from Trident and Createx, and the airbrushes for this one are going to be Segola airbrushes, which are made in Spain, or it's a company from Spain. So we've tested these brushes out in a few of our other videos, just doing a quick review. This is now the artwork that we wanted to really give them a proper run on, so we hope you enjoy this video. So you could see I was switching off there you go, I just switched it off again there, just to check to see that I'm getting all of my lines. So it looks looking pretty good. So I'm happy with that. You can see all the lines are drawn in. So I've spent my time doing that, and I think I'm pretty confident now that I've got everything, that I can now move on to my composite panel, and I'll go to transfer that design. Okay, so before we transfer the design, I want to mask up a border on this particular artwork. You don't have to do this. This is just something that I wanted to do. Now sometimes, because we put a lot of paint on throughout the process, masking tape, which I'm using at the moment, doesn't usually give you a sharp enough border. So what I'm going to do, just to be safe, is I'm going to use another tape, which is a fine line tape, and I'm just going to trace around, line it up with the edge of my masking tape, and that's a vinyl tape. It's like what they call a fine line tape. They're available from the body shop, or any of your paint supply shops. They should have them, and that will give me a nice clean edge, so that when I peel the tape off at the end of the artwork, I'm not going to get that sort of furriness, which I want to avoid. Now I'm just back masking that to make sure that I don't get any overspray, or if I've got a fine gap in between that and the masking tape, then I'm not going to get overspray on that. So that's what that back masking is for. Okay, the next step is to lay the artwork that we've now traced on the back of on your composite panel, and then we're going to transfer that on. Now, this composite panel has already been prepped. I didn't go through and show you that on this particular video, because I've got numerous videos using composite panels, and in each one I show you how to prep it. So I didn't want to keep rehashing that. For everyone that's pretty regular on this channel, they would have seen how to prep these composite panels. So if you're unsure, by all means flick through some of our videos. 9 times out of 10 we're doing them on a composite panel, and it will show you how to prep them. So now that I'm happy with the position of the Cassowary reference, what I'm going to do now is, using an HB pencil, I'm going to basically just draw straight over the top of the entire reference. This will then transfer my lead pencil from before, which is on the reverse of this bit of paper. It will transfer that onto my composite panel and give me all the lines that I've drawn in, and that will be my reference to begin painting this particular artwork. So even though that I use this particular method, and I thought I'd share this with you because it's something that you can, or anyone can do at home, just print out the reference that they want, you print it to scale, draw on the back using a light box or a window in your home like I explained earlier, using a 2B pencil, and then flip it back over, transfer it, and you're ready to rock. This can also be achieved by using other methods. Like I said, you can project things straight onto a surface if it's a canvas or a t-shirt or something like a mural, and it can't be printed to scale. Or you can also go and purchase yourself some carbon paper, which will also do this type of transfer method quite easily. That should be available from leading stationery supply shops or art shops, specialized art shops. All right, so there's a few different methods, but I just like to try and show you things that are easily achieved, relatively inexpensive, and things that you can do straight away at home. You don't have to go out and buy all this special stuff. A lot of it can be done, and you will achieve the same result. It might take a little bit longer, but all in all, it does work. All right, so hopefully you find this helpful. Alright, now that I've drawn over the top of everything, you can see that's transferred all my lines. So now the cassowary is fully sketched out, and I'll be ready to start painting. Before I begin painting, I'm using an X-Acto blade, and I'm cutting around the perimeter of this printout of the reference. Now this has been printed out again to the same exact size as what I'm painting, so that way I can utilize this particular paper mask for freehand shields. So I know that the shapes are going to be the same, and I can use that later on when I do my background. You can also go a bit further and cut things out of the eye, and virtually use this as a paper template right the way through, but I've pretty much decided to complete majority of this artwork with freehand airbrush techniques, a few sort of templates, paper masks here and there, and also using an eraser pencil. So there's a few different mediums that you're going to learn throughout this 3-part step-by-step video. So we hope that you enjoy it and you get a lot out of it. Now to make this paper template, I printed out the reference to scale, like I said, in black and white, but it's actually printed on a photo paper, so it's a bit thicker, so that way it makes a better freehand paper template. So any sort of paper templates that you're going to do, make sure that you print them on that. Now you can see we're starting with a yellow oxide by Trident, and we're going to begin to lay down some foundations for this cassowary artwork. Now I'm using a Segola X-Tech 200 airbrush. This is a 0.2mm needle, so nice and fine needle. It sprays the Trident paint really nicely. I have thinned out the Trident paint a little bit with a bit of reducer, so on average I think for this particular color I mixed it about 1:1. Alright, so depending on what I'm doing, if I'm doing finer detail, generally I'll mix it further than that, even getting down to about 30, even 20 to 30% paint and 70 to 80% reducer, and then I'll turn the pressure right down. So depending on what I'm doing is how thick or thin I'm going to run my paint. So for this particular color, like I said, I'm just going to lay down a bit of a foundation. We want that sort of brownish tone. That'll help to map some things in. So we're just working in that horn-like area on the top of the cassowary's head there. So I'm actually spraying at about 20 psi for this particular airbrush. So as I said, it's about a 1:1 mix with this yellow oxide paint straight out of the bottle. And now I'm just covering that from a further distance. So I've started to establish some of the markings on that horn-like section. So up close to establish those, and then from a distance I'm just dusting over. So virtually just sketching it all in, getting this base in wherever it needs to be, a little bit in the eye there. Remember, keep the air on all the time when you're painting. So use the airbrush as it should be used, as a double action airbrush. Now I'm just putting in that area there towards the back of its neck. Bit of tip drawing there, so just pick that off and spray that out. And in the lower section of the beak, where a bit of that marking is, I've added a bit of yellow oxide in there. Now I'm just going back over what I've done, utilizing my reference and starting to establish a bit of detail and texturing in there instead of just painting it as a flat object. So you can see I'm constantly varying my height. Up close wherever I want sharper shadows, and further away where I want to dust in a section, but just also being careful to still control it. And you can see I'm building it up gradually, so I'm not just saturating an area, I'm doing it nice and light and then building up. So now we're using a 7057 Faber-Castell eraser pencil. Now you'll notice that this particular pencil has two ends to it. One has a white eraser tip and the other end has a pink eraser tip. The white eraser tip, which is what I'm using at the moment, is a harsher eraser. Okay, so it's a harder one. The pink, which I've just flipped to, is actually a softer one. Alright, so you can switch between either side or either end, and what that'll allow you to do is create different textures. So also depends on how long the paint has been drying, but you can see I'm establishing some of the harsher sort of details in there using the harder part of the pencil. So you virtually, it is an eraser right through, and what you do is you just sharpen them as you would a normal pencil. I don't put them in a pencil sharpener, I just use a X-Acto knife and kind of sharpen them on a bit of an angle so that you can cut them nice and fine, and you can make a nice fine point or an edge and then work off that. So we're going to be utilizing this particular pencil quite a way through. So it's going to be a bit of airbrushing as well as using this pencil to get some effects. It just makes it a lot easier and nicer to make something look a bit more photorealistic. So by using this, you're getting back to the white of the panel. Okay, in this case the panel. You can also use other papers and bits and pieces. One thing that works really well is a synthetic paper, which we actually are a distributor for Drew Blair. His synthetic paper works extremely well with all these methods. You can also glide an X-Acto blade on there to create hair textures, and you can spray a Windex down and wipe things off, and it's pretty amazing. So look out for that if you're interested. You can also jump on our website, and it'll be available in the online store I think it's in the miscellaneous section. Okay, so you've probably noticed I've just switched to brown. So this is the True Brown by Trident. So now that I've added some of the textures, so what will happen is as I'm painting, we'll be going back and forth from airbrush to eraser pencil, and we're going to start to create those textures, and then what I'll do is I'll virtually airbrush back over the top, so that'll start to knock them back into the background, and that'll give you that realistic illusion that the texture is not just stuck on the top, it's actually a part and a realistic part of the painting. Alright, so now I'm just working in and pulling out some more detail. So this brown is a very reddish brown, but it works really nicely with the reference that we've got and the color that we're matching to. And I'm also aware that I've got other tones to go over the top, so I want most of my colors to be reasonably bright to start with, and what I'll do is later on when I start shading with a sepia brown, I'll knock a lot of these colors right back, so it gives me a bit more control and allows for the artwork to be a bit more vibrant and not muddy. You don't want to muddy it up by dusting things with, you know, blacks and bits and pieces like that. So, but we'll get into that later on in the video. So I'm just trying to follow my reference as accurately as possible. Up really close for any super fine details. We want it nice and uneven, so it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. I'm just taking my time. I'm watching my overspray as well, even though I am going to do a background. I'm still trying to keep my overspray to a minimum, just so that we don't have to worry about eliminating too much of it at a later stage when we put in the background. So you can see by coating over that true brown, that's really starting to ready up quite a bit. Picking off a bit more tip drying there, so that's pretty common, even though the Trident paint is one of the best for lack of tip dry. It really does run quite nice and smooth. It's very close to using automotive paint, and I've used a lot of the other brands, and I just find that the Trident paint does flow really nicely. I know there's other people that prefer different brands, but it does work extremely well, and you can still manipulate it. Even though it dries a bit quicker, you can still erase it and manipulate it and do all the things with the eraser pencil, which is handy. So now I'm up close and I'm starting to render that eye, so nice and sharp around the perimeter of it. Just airbrushing that pupil in, adding a bit of shading and some uneven textures in on that section where the yellow oxide was. Remember to keep checking your reference, especially on an eye. You want to get as much detail in there as possible, even at these early stages, because taking your time to add all that in is going to make a big difference later on. Now you can see I've switched to a sepia brown, and I'm going to start to further detail and bring out my shadows. So up really close for this particular color in this particular spot which I'm working on. You can see I'm going back and forth with that trigger finger, and I'm getting some real sharp little shadows in there and some textures. So staying up nice and close, just carefully rendering into that area. I'm also being wary not to go straight over the top of everything that I've done. So I want to just bring some of these darker shades in there and textures in there, but I don't want to eliminate all of my eraser pencil marks that I've already done. Again, just take your time and follow your reference. Just paint what you see, and that way you can be nice and accurate. Again, I'm building up the tone. I'm not saturating a certain area to get quick coverage. I'm just taking my time. This also allows me to control it so that I don't go too dark, too quick. Remember, you can always go darker. It's very hard to go backwards and remove the paint. Bit of tip drying again. So just blast that out, pick off the little bit of dried paint on the end of the needle, and then keep painting. You'll notice I've also removed the air cap, so that just allows me to get some finer detail up close. So constantly varying my height. Just to get different textures. So sometimes I'll also pull back further on the trigger deliberately when I'm up close, and what that'll do is the air will actually blow some of the paint out, and I get a different sort of texture. So I'll get like a gap in the middle of it, and heavier around the outside. It works really well. It actually works extremely well if you're doing little rivets and bits and pieces, and it can look really effective. It's a bit of a trick to get the feel for it, but it does work. Again, bit of tip drying, so picking that off. And sepia brown, it's just such a great color that you can use. It really works nicely and shades over the top of so many colors. It's a great alternative instead of using just black. Black tends to kill a lot of things, so, and you can always mix a couple of drops of black into your sepia brown to make it darker for shading. So I'm starting to work still in that area above the beak there, just getting a few more of those textures. You can see I'm coming back a bit further, fogging that in, and then up close to where I want that to be nice and clean. You can see this is all done freehand. There's no templates at this stage. I'm just slowly taking my time, building up my layers. So try and get as much texture in at this stage as possible. Even though a lot of these are the underlying colors, it just will make life a lot easier as we go more and more detailed. So I'm back working on that bone section. So this is a bit of a different pattern in this part of the bone. And I'm just going to link that all in. Again, up close, getting all those little dot uneven sort of shadows in there. The more uneven the better really in this area, because we're trying to create that look of bone, so it's going to be all pitted, and it's definitely not going to be just one smooth color or one flat color. You've really got to establish all of those little tiny imperfections, which will make it more realistic. You'll also notice that some of this video is sped up at about twice the speed, and then other sections are in real time. Hopefully this will keep it a bit more interesting so that you're not sitting through hours upon hours of footage. So just spotting in this detail as well, all these little textures. So you can see how I'm holding the airbrush to steady myself, but I'm also sort of rapidly pulling back and forth, or just back on that trigger and letting it go, and that bouncing around is kind of helping to give me that uneven texture. So now back in with my eraser pencil, and I'm going to start pulling out some of these little highlights. You can see how easily that removes the paint as well. And the reason I jump between the two is that with the softer one, if the paint's dried a little bit longer, you can see there it's not a harsh highlight, it's more of a softer highlight, so you can kind of remove a top layer and then sort of protect the underlying ones, it's really handy if you're going to start doing portraits and you want skin textures and everything. The eraser pencil definitely makes a big difference. So you can see also just blending back over what I've done and then coming back in with the eraser pencil. So now that the paint is extremely fresh, so you can kind of spray back over it to reactivate it, and that will make the paint really fresh, and it'll strip it right back to that composite panel and give you a real bright, sharp white highlight. You can see how sharp that highlight was, which is fine. You know, if these highlights are that sharp in the reference, then that's the way they should be created in the painting. So again, with photorealism, it's always the case of paint what you see. Your eye will play tricks on you, but if you follow your reference, even if you just break down your reference, then that makes life a lot easier for you. What I mean by breaking it down is sometimes I'll instruct students to block out an area. So for argument's sake, if they're working on an eye, I'll get them to mask up or even cut out a square in a sheet of paper, so you can only see through that square, and that only reveals the eye. And then what you do is you block off your reference at that same point, and then that way you can just focus on those areas and the shapes and shadows that are in that particular area. You're not getting sidetracked by looking at all these other spots that do create the artwork. But if you're airbrushing one section, you need to be correct with what you're putting into that area. So sometimes by isolating it, it allows your eye to just focus on all the shapes and shadows within that small space, rather than trying to get your eye to focus on it when there's all these other distractions around. So that's a good little tip, and it does work really well. So if you're having trouble focusing on just one spot and picking out all the correct areas and replicating all the correct shapes and shadows, we'll give that a go. That might help you. So shading away. So you can see I'm building up quite a variety of tones. I'm keeping my highlights or my highlighted areas a bit lighter, so I'm not just dusting over everything. Again, I'm careful that I don't overdo it. I'm taking it one step at a time and building my tones. Bit of freehand airbrushing there just to pull in the edge of that bone section. If you're not confident with that, you can cut yourself a paper template or use the negative section of the template that we cut earlier, and that will give you that correct edge. The edge will then be a bit sharper though, so sometimes if you've got a blurred background or something's out of focus, then utilizing the airbrush and making it softer will replicate that blurred appearance. Just blending out from there and going back, adding more texture, bringing in the whole artwork or that whole bone section, making that all come together. Again, the key is to vary your amount of paint and the height at which you've got the airbrush held, because further away is always going to give you a softer shadow, whereas up close will be sharper. So when you want to get those imperfections, those sharp little cracks in the bone, then that's when you're up close and you're doing those fine little dagger strokes. But if you want to get a bit more coverage and a softer blend, or you just want to soften one area or blend it out from a harsh shadow into a softer one, then you'd be further away and you'll blend that out, or you'll dust from a distance, just like that there. I'm dusting back over, so I've gone in, I've done sharp texturing, and then now I'm coming in with my airbrush at a further distance just to soften those areas up, and that way you've got a shadow on top of texture that's already there, and that virtually will create well, it allows the texture to remain there, so you're looking through your shadow and you can still see the texture underneath. And that's why in a lot of my videos I'll say, okay, you need to texture as you're going, and then that way that texture, even if you only see 5% or 10% of it by the time you finish the painting, it still makes a big difference. Trust me, that 5 or 10% really makes a difference between an okay painting to something that, wow, that's really cool. You know, because it's those little subtleties and those extra textures and those finer details that set it aside from all the other paintings that you see that have got that flat appearance. And there's really no substitute. You just got to spend the time putting those details in. And you know, if you spend a couple more hours on a job or a painting that you're doing, it doesn't matter. It's going to make such a difference at the end. So just adding a few more shadows. You can see I'm gradually building everything up. I'm not trying to go too quickly. I'm just adding a little bit, then checking my reference, and then going gradually darker. So I'm not trying to get it all in one hit, just gradually building my tones. Take your time and build them gradually, and it will make it so much easier to go more and more and add more and more detail, rather than going too heavy too quick and then you've stuffed it and you have to wipe it all off again. So you don't want to do that. So you can see how well this sepia brown tints the previous tones that we used. So that firstly that yellow oxide, and then the brown, that reddish brown from Trident. So this, yeah, sepia brown, it just works so nicely. And you can see how it's taken the edge off that, it's knocked a bit of the reddish, that real brightness out of that that second brown that we used, that true brown. So again, it's all about layering. So I'm going to work on the beak part of it now. in the nostril there, and then I've got my shadow there in that nostril to show that there's depth. So again, I'm not just colouring that in as a solid tone, but I'm just using straight sepia brown on this. So this is just the first colour, there's no true brown underneath. I don't want any of that reddish colour. So I'm again following my reference, being careful to follow my lines. So follow your reference as closely as possible, and obviously the grey lead lines that you've got on your panel. Again, if you're not confident to be able to do these sort of fine lines and sharper shadows and dagger strokes, then either practice or utilize a freehand shield, or again you could go back to your paper template and cut an edge and spray on that. Again, you can see how much my airbrush height is varying. So I'm up close getting a few textures in, and then pulling straight away from the surface, dusting it in, and then vice versa. So just repeating both of those. So take your time with this section, because some of these sharp lines were a bit tricky to do, especially if you're starting out with the airbrush. This may be a bit too challenging, this artwork, but a lot of the stuff that you'll learn in this particular artwork you can apply to other paintings, especially other wildlife paintings. So remember, if you do find any of these videos helpful, and if this is your first time watching one of our videos, and you too would like to check out more of our work or more of our videos, by all means, feel free to hit subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community and help to inspire you and your artwork. We have lots of step-by-step tutorials like this that we do, and we constantly like trying to add more and more, as well as we do weekly live streams to show you what's going on in our shop, progress updates, new products that are available and coming soon. So yeah, anything airbrush related, or even if you've never airbrushed, you just like the artwork, yeah, it'd be great to have you join us. So you can see for a lot of this I'm up nice and close. Again, still using that sepia brown, and I'm just establishing all of my tones around that beak area. A lot of fine lines in this, sharp shadows and dagger strokes to create all these shadows. So take your time, make sure your paint mix is correct, because you don't want to be sort of halfway through a line and you get tip drying or you get spattering. So it's important that it's always good to have a bit of paper next to you, just a bit of scrap paper that you can practice on. So do a few test lines and then go to it, especially if you're starting out. A couple of little dagger strokes in there, and then going back over to build more texture and darken sections. So again, to darken a bit, I'm not just dusting over it, I'm actually building that up with the dagger strokes. The more dagger strokes you put and the tighter that you put them, as in the closer they are together, they will essentially then create a darker shadow. And then obviously if you leave dagger strokes, or any type of stroke that is, with a bigger gap, then it will become a lighter part of that shadow. So just still going back in, adding more, just a bit more detail, some real defined ones, just to make it look more natural by keeping everything a bit more uneven. You don't want it all to be too perfect and too even. It is an animal, and if you are doing photorealism, it's like if you're rendering a tiger, you don't want every single stroke to be dead perfect. Those dagger strokes will vary, and exactly the same case with this cassowary. So just continuing there with the beak. You can see it's getting later in the evening at the shop here, so hopefully the lighting's still good enough so that you can see what's going on. We try not to film too much at night so that you don't have too much artificial lighting, but I also go back in when I'm editing and try and adjust things to make it as clear as possible for you. Now we're putting in some of those random dagger strokes there. You can already start to see the 3D element of that beak. Again, by not just dusting over everything and creating a flat surface, you're gradually building your tones and you're leaving lighter sections. So up a bit closer with the camera now on this eye section so you can see the detail that's going to be added into there. So I'm going to finish off colouring in the pupil with that sepia brown. Even though we're going to go over with a darker tone later, I still build my foundation rather than leaving it at the end. Now, working around the perimeter of the eye. Just making sure the airbrush is running perfect for this part. Splattering a little bit, so okay, now I've got to get these nice tight dagger strokes in there. Just getting that shadow around the perimeter of the eye there. Now I'm going to start putting in some of the textures around the eye. Now these are the fine dagger strokes that I was talking about. So you want to be nice and controlled with the airbrush, kind of locking my hand, and my elbows are kind of tucked in on the side so that it resists the movement, so I don't get a lot of swaying movement, almost like a robotic sort of movement. So you can see how fine I'm going with this airbrush, so the 0.2 needle is really doing a good job here. At this stage it's really important to keep checking your reference, especially on the eye. It's probably the most crucial part of any painting, so I like to also put my reference images in my iPad or on some sort of screen that you can zoom in on, so that way you can save them in there and then blow them up as you need them. So just carefully adding more and more detail into that eye. Some of these little lashes that we're putting in with the dagger strokes there. So you can see how carefully I'm moving that airbrush from a slight distance and then going in really close just to get that nice sharp point. Takes a bit of practice, so I do have a video that shows you how to do dagger strokes, so that you can watch that, learn how to do them, and then apply that to all these different artworks. The dagger stroke is definitely one of the most utilized strokes in airbrushing. You use it over and over again, or especially I do, not just for lashes and palm trees and blades of grass. Like, it's got a lot of other aspects that you use where you use the dagger stroke and you don't even realize you're doing it. Predominantly for when you're doing sharp shadows. So even if you're going from a broader shadow into a sharp edge, or you want it to end sharply, that's pretty much the same sort of thing. Like, you're still using that same motion. So wherever you need to control or have a controlled shadow, even a controlled highlight, you'll find that you will use the same motion as a dagger stroke to create that. So a lot of people ask, what other applications does it have? Well, they're virtually endless. You're using it all the time and you don't even realize. It might not be looking like an exact dagger stroke, but if the action is still the same. So I would definitely recommend learning it. And it also just gets you to really get used to using double action airbrush techniques. So still continuing with the detailing around the eye, and still obviously using our sepia brown. Coming back in on some of those lashes there. So again, adding all the details in first and then dusting back over a section. Again, paint what you see in your reference. Try not to just guess. You can see that's starting to come together now. We're getting all our definitions in, all our textures are in, our shapes and shadows. So this is the most important part too with all your first steps. They need to be as accurate as possible so that you don't later on just follow an area that you've painted, especially if that area is incorrect, because then you may repeat that mistake again. So you don't want to do that as you add in all your other tones. So it's important that your first tone is always nice and accurate. So generally, when you first start your painting, these areas take the longest because you're establishing everything, you're virtually laying the foundations for the painting, and then as you go on in the painting, you actually should be painting less and less as you introduce darker colors and highlights and bits and pieces. Sure, it can take longer because you've got to be really wary of where you're putting those shadows or highlights and the accuracy that you're using, and also you don't want to just go over everything because then you'll eliminate everything you've done in this step. So just remember to keep following that reference. So just some more random textures here and there. Building up the tones, coming back in and fixing up any areas that I've missed. Or that I want to go a bit darker in, or I'm just adding extra pieces just to shape it. So above the brow there, or in the brow section, just some random little hairs with that sepia tone. Even though we'll put a color over the top, this is just the first tone, it's basically our little, like I said, foundation, our roadmap. and then as we paint, even you eliminate sections, you're going to add other colors on top. So now, coming in with my eraser pencil, I'm going to bring out some of the highlights, because on the reference they're extremely sharp and bright. So what better way to do that with the eraser pencil, which will then make a nice sharp crisp highlight and allow it to go right back to the board, the aluminium composite panel white. So you can see how controlled I can be with this eraser. And then if I think, oh, that's too bright, I can always dust back over it too. So you can see I'm just dabbing it. Make sure you get the residue off as well, but you can see that's already given that glisten and that wetness to the eye. And now I'm just going to pick out some of these as well. Again, if they're too harsh, I can always dust back over it, which is exactly what I'm doing now. So you can see how a slight dusting has just knocked that into the background and made it more subtle. So you've got that control. You know, utilize the eraser pencil, bring out your highlights. If the paint is too fresh and you've knocked it right back to the white and you don't want it to be as white, then get your airbrush and dust over it, and that will virtually knock it back a few shades, and then you can either redo it, let it dry longer, or just leave it as is if you've gone perfect with it. So it just gives you a lot more versatility. So you can see I'm not just shading this area, I'm still texturing, okay? So very important to add all these little imperfections and little hairs, and which are all created by those little dagger strokes and little lines. So everything's, you don't want it all to run in one particular direction. You want that sort of uneven texture. So very important. Again, up nice and close and nice and sharp where I want it to be. So really controlling the airbrush. Even though you can't hear it because we eliminate the air sound on these videos, but the air is on all the time. So now I'm just building up, adding the small little divots. Doing these little hairs and doing them like a cross hatch. You can see how I'm working my way over one of those hairs numerous times. My paint is relatively thin and I kind of sketch with the airbrush when I'm doing super fine stuff. And it also allows me to give a more random pattern. So that way I don't just go along and do half a dozen hairs all in the same distance apart, the same direction, because it would just look way too, it'd just look fake. It wouldn't look as real. I mean, it's just got to be natural. Now I'm dusting back over those sections to darken them, and you can still see the texture through there because I've spent the time and I've actually added that in prior. Again, take your time, don't rush it. If it takes a little bit longer to get all these little bits in, then remember it is worth it. So getting some of those finer lines there, just darkening them a little bit. and dusting over some of those lighter areas. So you can see I've left them out, but now I've done the artwork or the textures around that spot, so I've got a better understanding of how dark I want to go or how light I want to keep them. So I deliberately kept them light before, but now that I've got that area established, I can now confidently come back in and darken those areas without going too dark, because I've got a basis to work with. Whereas if you've only got the lines and that white all the way around, it's not giving you an accurate sort of idea of how dark you need to go or how light you need to keep it. So you can see there, especially that section of the beak is still really bright white. Just taking my time, getting everything in. Dusting over the top, so further away, now I've knocked that white section out and it's all sort of merged into one. Deepening the shadow in the nostril of the beak there. Just going to dust over some of those highlights in the eye there, just knocking them back. So I just check that reference and they need to be a bit darker. So I'm going in and just adjusting anything that needs adjusting at this stage. Even though this isn't the final tone, I'm treating it that way. So the more sort of a 3D effect that you can get at this stage, and the more that you can get it to look like you're painting or the finished painting, even by using only a few colors, then you're on the right track. So you can see by like this sepia tone, once that beak's gone in, it's now starting to really take shape. You can see that eye, everything, it's starting to look a bit more realistic. So I know that once I add the other tones and the other colors, then this part of it's not going to be eliminated. It's just going to enhance what I've already done. All right, so you want to get everything sort of accurate from the ground up, and then you work on that. If you, for argument's sake, if you're looking at it and the eye looks wrong or the beak looks out of shape, well then it needs to be rectified. It could be an issue with your projection or your transferring. Could have moved, you could have painted or followed the wrong lines. So you need to be really careful to follow your reference right the way through, especially when you're doing something like this. So very similar steps to if I was doing a portrait. You need to be extremely accurate. One of the hardest things to paint because of that. So you can't just make things up. At least here, if I do, one hair incorrect or I add one extra, you're not going to notice. It's not going to change the look of the piece too much. But drastic things like an eye not being level or in the right spot can definitely stuff something up. So you want to be careful to get all the main areas correct, and then just build your tones and just follow your reference and replicate it as best as possible. Just doing some stray bits of hair there. Coming towards the back of the cassowary's head. So you can see I sketched in that sharp shadow as the divider there where I wanted to control my overspray. Then I started to blend in my little dagger strokes to create the hair, and now I'm feathering out from that initial tone to get my graduated tone. You can see that's blended out nicely. I'm lightly just picking up some of the bits of hair coming off the back of the head there as well. Ready to move on to the next part. So which will be just to work back under this eye. You can also see how much tonal value you can achieve by using just this one tone of sepia. It looks like I've gone and added in sort of 2 or 3 different mixes to get that sort of dark, that mid and that lighter part of the sepia color, but it's all controlled with this sepia. That's what I love about it. And then when it blends over other colors, it just works really nicely. So just carefully putting that sepia wherever it needs to be. Adding in more little imperfections and stray little hairs. And the good thing is, because I know there'll be a tone over the top, so we're going to add a color on top of that. These tones are going to be underneath, so it's going to give a really nice end result. So now I've switched to a blue mix. So this is just made up of using Trident White and reducer, bit of reducer, and then a couple of drops of the Trident Blue, the True Blue. And now I'm just mapping that in. So this is, because you got the white in there, it's an opaque tone, so I do run this one a bit thicker. So don't put as much reducer in, just enough so that it runs through nicely. I'm using the X-Tech 300, so this is their 0.3mm needle. So it's a bit thicker needle, it's got the larger cup, so perfect to just get this color into the painting. And then I can switch back to my X-Tech 200 later on, the one with the 0.2mm needle, just to get some of the finer details. But right now I just want to mottle this in. I don't want to be too smooth everywhere, because this is all that ruffled area of the just under the beak area there, so on the cassowary's neck, and because of that sort of uneven texturing, I want that to already be in the base. So if I went and did it all smooth and perfect, then I'd have to spend more time roughing it up later on. So you can already start to achieve that with your first toning. So just blending that wherever it needs to be. Again, take your time. Follow your reference. And even though I'm freehanding, I'm still keeping those edges nice and clean of overspray, so don't go too crazy. So even though I'm coming back a bit further, I'm not too far away where I'm just going to spray the whole thing with a Mr. Blue and then ruin what I've already done. So you've got to be careful of that. If you're not confident, then probably good idea to mask it up and protect what you've already done, because this opaque color will eliminate what you've done to a certain point. Like if you get overspray on it, it starts to, mottle it, which you can kind of see a little bit there happening underneath the pupil there. So you just want to make sure that you get this blue into all the areas where it needs to be. So just being careful there where we're risking overspray going on that bony area. A little bit's okay, because we are going to go back over the top with a darker tone later, so that'll eliminate anything. But yeah, we just try and keep it as tight as possible so that it doesn't create too much work and clean up work later on. So I think we're almost done with the amount of blue that we need. So now we can switch back to the X-Tech 200 and with our sepia brown, I'm just going to do the feathery sections. So these are just dagger strokes. Cutting in on the edge there just to get that nice clean edge. So up nice and fine around that. And then just working my way down. You can see I'm reasonably aggressive with the strokes and the movement of my hand. I'm not sort of doing it slowly, I'm reasonably quick with it. Obviously with this airbrush, if you've got one similar or if you're using this particular airbrush, be careful, because I don't put a lot of paint in the jar for that reason, or the color cup for that reason, so that I don't spill it everywhere when I'm doing this. The other one has a lid on it, the X-Tech 300, but this one is an open cup, so you don't want to go spilling it all over your painting. Just getting all those dagger strokes in to build up that feathery part. So again, I don't want to just get all these perfectly lined up dagger strokes, and I'm going over certain areas to darken different strokes more than others. So we want that kind of controlled unevenness, if you will. It's yeah, we want to build up our dagger strokes, but we don't want them in too many radical directions, just still following the same sort of direction, but darkening off certain ones, keeping other areas lighter. So just to create a sense of depth. So just gradually building everything up. Getting a nice balance here. Checking our reference and then moving on to this side. Just going to pull out a bit of detail here on the edge. Again, where it meets the blue, be nice and accurate. So virtually do the same as what you did with the other area. Same thing, we're still doing our dagger strokes. Keep them controlled. Try not to get overspray in that other section. That sort of lighter section there, we're going to add a color to that later on. So just working in those dagger strokes. You can really notice how I'm sketching with that airbrush. Just gradually building it up. And we're going to continue that until we finish that whole section. So that pretty much wraps up the first part of this 3-part video step by step. So I hope you enjoyed it. And we hope that you will join us for part 2 to learn more about how to create this cassowary artwork. Until next time, feel free to check out any of our other videos, and thanks again for watching. We do really appreciate it. In the meantime, if you haven't already, feel free to hit subscribe. We have plenty of step-by-step tutorials, quick tips, airbrush insight, showcase, live streams, and much more. You can also visit our website at airbrushasylum.com.au. Thanks for watching.